All right, good evening, residents of the British Virgin Islands. I'm Rhonda Hutch-Smith, Coordinator of Financial Literacy at the BVI Financial Services Commission. Our financial literacy program, now in its 11th year, goes by the name Money Matters BVI. And Money Matters BVI is pleased to put on tonight's e-forum, Testimonies and Stories of Women's Economic Empowerment. Our panel today consists of Mr. Clarence Faulkner. He's the founder and managing director of PMI Group of Companies, where he specializes in investment management, development of private wealth and social protection systems, among other things. Mrs. Nona Vanterpool, who is the CEO of Vanterpool's Enterprises Limited, and she's an active member of Zonta Club, a local organization which pushes for women's rights. And I'm especially happy that we could book Mrs. Vanterpool this evening, since Zonta had the extremely busy few days to be executing their International Women's Day initiative, handing out yellow roses like this one. So next we have Mrs. Etlin Reimer, a local author and historian. Her book is called Life in Paradise, speaking about her time growing up in King Garden Bay. She's a member of the clergy and a retired legal administrator. Next, we have Mr. Jack Husbands, a senior lawyer who's no stranger to Money Matters BVI, since he served as a key resource person for our Wills and Estate Planning series and Insurance series. And finally, joining us on the web, we have Dr. Benedicta Samuels, an attorney at law, who offers advice on family and property matters. And she is an advocate for social justice and has been a key estate and property law resource for Money Matters BVI in the past few years. Now we're streaming live from the Money Matters BVI Facebook page, from ZBVI Radio and Zeking. We welcome our various audiences. Our listening audience is invited to join the conversation by calling 340-7467 or 340-7419 at any time. So beyond issues of gender equality and inclusivity, women, when given access to skills and opportunities, can bring unique insight, which can help businesses, markets, and economies to grow exponentially. Our conversation this evening will traverse women's access to opportunities, financial services, jobs, education, property, and so forth, all the while managing the home and contributing to the upkeep of the family. So, Mrs. Reimer, we begin with you. Our discussion begins way back in time when we hear that women were thrust into managing family economic development because many of the men of the time had to migrate for work. I'm told that some women also migrated. Can you take us back to that time?
Well, yes, because I'm a product of that. My dad, when I was, before I became a teenager, sorry, my mic was off. Let me begin again. Before I became a teenager, my dad used to work overseas. And I remember those lonely times when I would wish my dad was home. But I realized that he had to do what he had to do. And also, I remember I had an uncle. He went to Santo Domingo to work and he never returned. He stayed there, made a family. It was not until many, many years later that he came back to the islands. So I'm a product of all this working overseas and stuff.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Reimer. Would anyone else around the table like to chime in at this point?
I would say I'm somewhat familiar with it as well because my grandfather, he migrated to Santo Domingo to work. He always said that it was a beautiful country, but he didn't like the laws because I guess many of them went into the window, as they would say. So whenever the authorities would come around, they would have to run and hide. And, all they were trying to do was make a living for their families. And my grandfather and two of his brothers went over to Santo Domingo. One of them did not make it back. He died on a fancy meal when he was coming back. But they did what they had to do. So I'm very familiar with that, just listening to my grandfather speak about it. He didn't have any children over there or anything, as he said to me, but his two brothers did. They did start families over there. And one didn't return, and the other one returned, as well as his children. And they got status eventually. Okay. So we have a whole tribe in Vanderpool family in Santo Domingo. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
okay. Mr. Faulkner, anything? Or Mr. Husbands?
No, I came to the BVI late, so I didn't really have full understanding of the migration patterns. But shortly after I came, I read the book by Wallach and Ron Harrigan, which contains a history of the migration patterns. I'm sorry. I came to the BVI late, so I didn't have that knowledge. But when I came, I read the book, very good book by Norval Harrigan and Pearl Wallach, which contained the migration patterns. And you could see how people moved from the BVI outside, and then ultimately from outside of the BVI into the BVI, mm-hmm. so to speak. So, and in those days, it was mainly the men who migrated.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar story to what you've heard before. I mean, my grandfather was one of the shipsmen sailors that would transport good actually from the Dominican Republic to the Virgin Islands. And he eventually also migrated to Antigua, where my family originated from, because he was one of those persons who migrated from Anegada, and was sailing between the islands as far down as the Dominican Republic, and then as far east as Antigua. And eventually, once he was finished in Antigua, he then relocated back to the Virgin Islands. So similar story in terms of migrating to greener pastures at the time. So yeah.
Okay. Okay, during our discussion, we will have some resource persons join us on the phone as well. And one of them is Mrs. Eileen Parsons, who joins us now. Mrs. Parsons, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Mrs. Parsons?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we're starting as far back as possible, and we're pre-1950 when so many persons migrated for the benefit of the family, and that included some women, and I'm sure there was much sacrifice involved in that idea
You
of
are
migration.
you're repeating yourself on the radio.
Yes, you'll need to turn down your radio a bit.
Now my radio is turned down.
Okay, so go ahead.
Excuse me.
You can go ahead.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having me. I cannot speak about. Oh goodness. So, I started to speak. I cannot speak about the 1950s, as I didn't grow up here. But my childhood was spent in St. Thomas, where because of the war years, many BVI landers, men and women, came down. The men came to work on the two war projects, the sub-base and the airfield, and women were able to get work with some of the men who came in to St. Thomas to oversee the projects. I am speaking and I am hearing myself long afterward. Something isn't right. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead. I think you will be getting a feedback because you're hearing me through the line here, since you're on the phone, and you are also hearing me through your radio.
Okay. Is there anything you want to ask me so I could? Oh, Jesus.
Okay, would you like to speak a bit about the condition, the sacrifice that these women made, both those who stayed behind and those who traveled to the United States Virgin Islands? I know you said you're a product you're one of those persons who was sent to study in the United States Virgin Islands.
Oh. Here, when the war had already started, and men and women were migrating for better salaries, not extremely better living conditions, and the aunt who was raising me decided to move to St. Thomas, and I 3 months into second standard, we left and we migrated to St. Thomas, where I stayed until I graduated from Charlotte Amalia in 1949. But down there, during the war years, the housing was minimal. St. Thomas was not prepared for the onslaught of men from the different Caribbean islands and women who were coming in. Fortunately, we had family living there before my grandfather was and a cousin, so we were able to find shelter. But I remember one gentleman telling me that he used to sleep under carton because there was no available housing. The housing was very poor because they didn't expect such an onslaught of men from the different Caribbean islands. I don't know if there's anything you want to ask me.
Okay, we will come back to you a bit later in the discussion, if that's okay.
Yes, it is quite okay. I'll just you just call me, the young man will call me, so
Yes.
I would listen to the other speakers.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Samuels.
Yes. Pleasant evening to everyone. Am I being heard?
Yes,
Can you hear
go
me?
right ahead.
Thank you. Yes, a pleasant evening to everyone.
Yes, go right ahead.
My fellow panelists, and in particular, a happy International Women's Day to all of the women, whether you're listening or otherwise. I can identify with the sentiments expressed by my fellow panelists and by the caller just now, where my grandfather, Antonio Scatliff, himself had migrated to the Dominican Republic. And so, to a large extent, my grandmother...
We're not hearing you very clearly.
All right.
We're not hearing you very clearly. I'm not sure.
I was told that my mic was working well. I'm not sure what the problem is now.
Yes, breaking up a bit.
Am I being heard any better? I will get that rectified and come back and return to the program. I will get that rectified and
Dorian, is
return
that
later.
on our end, other side?
Yes, when we were testing, I was told that everything was in order. I'm not sure what the problem is now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are you using a mic? Can you use the computer's microphone? Or can you plug in a mic?
That's what I'm doing.
Using a mic?
I am using the computer
The
mic.
internet, okay.
But you can come back to me a little later. I'll get this rectified.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Husbands, let me come over to you. In terms of the legal and cultural norms that some women could not own property, it created some issues. And I know, yes, you would have migrated to the British Virgin Islands later on, but the human condition in the Caribbean was very similar all around. How did this impact the ability of women to advance economically? And let's have your contribution.
Yes, that's correct. Originally, women couldn't own property in their own right. They owned property through their fathers or their husbands, but they couldn't own property in their own right. That was abolished into the 20th century. So women could own property in their own right. But thank you. Additionally, uh, for social reasons, property was still held, even when people were married. Property was still held in the name of the husband, the spouse, in the name of my own parents. The property was held in my father's name. That was sort of considered natural, but it had repercussions if the marriage broke up and or the husband died early, and then the inheritance was through his line rather than, and the wife may not have got what may have been her fair share. So you had that, but the predominant thing was that even though women eventually were able to own property in their own right, for social reasons, women probably were housewives, or it was just a social norm that the property would be held in the name of the husband, and that continued for a very long time.
Any stories to share of that show really how this impacted women?
Yes, there's one extreme case. The law is that marriage revokes a will. A lot of people don't know that. If you make a will, then you get married. The marriage revokes the will, so you have to make another will after you got married. So there was this man called Mr. Hill, and the case was appealed to the Privy Council. He had a mistress for a lot of years, and then his wife died, and he'd made a will leaving property for this lady and the children by this lady. The children were what was called at that time illegitimate, and they wouldn't have had any rights. There was no status of Children's Act at that time. So the children wouldn't have inherited his property unless he provided for them in a will. If he didn't make a will, they would get nothing. So in order to honor the relationship, he then got married to the woman who had been his mistress for years, not after he had made a will, not knowing that the marriage revoked the will. And then a lot of those children ended up with nothing because they were considered illegitimate. They had not been made legitimate. So there are a lot of pitfalls like that where, because of these peculiar rules of law that marriage revokes a will, a rule that nobody knows except a few lawyers, that these children, they fought their way up to the Privy Council and lost. And the children of the wife ended up with the property rather than these children that he was specifically trying to take care of by making the second will, which got revoked by the marriage.
Okay.
So these things happen because of the social conditions. And I'm sure they happen throughout the Caribbean as well, where British law was enforced.
Okay, thank you. Okay, before continuing with those present, let me go back to Dr. Samuels. I'm told that she was coming through very clear online. It's just what we were hearing was cracking up a bit. So, Dr. Samuels,
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I was trying to express my agreement with those who had spoken earlier about the migration activity within their families. And I wanted to identify with that. But I can also endorse what my learned friend, Mr. Husbands, had just said about succession matters as it relates to wills and later marriages and so on. And so I'm looking forward to making more of a contribution along those lines as we advance in the discussion.
thank you. Okay, so the 1950s was, many persons here probably were very young or not in existence. However, we would have heard stories. And so, Mrs. Reimer, let me begin with you and let me get a feel from everyone of the stories that you have heard about the struggles of women, particularly back in those days. What was it like, as opposed to what we see these days, the kind of liberties that women have, opportunities that they have? What were some of the main areas of economic struggle?
In the 50s. Well, I was born in the 50s. The struggles that they had, back then life was hard, but if you ask them, they would say no. They would have to get up so early in the mornings to go and get their clothes washed. And they would walk long distance to the guts
You were
because
captain
they had to
just
go
now
early.
of the
I was?
walking there. I didn't take out the view, the camera. So pass. You're gone?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So the constraint was that, they didn't have the modern appliances like we take for granted today. We take for granted so many things like the washing machine, the dryer, because I remember when I was little going with some of the women to the gut to wash. And believe you me, it was a hard task, but they enjoyed it because they were communicating, they were fellowshipping. So it didn't seem so hard to them because they were enjoying the company. And, back in the 50s, I was born in the 50s, like I said, the women had to just do everything in the house because the man was not there. And they had to be both father and mother to the kids. And the thing I like about that era is because the village was raising children. If something was happening in one household, the other household would chip in. And so it was a good era. I look back and I have very fond memories of the women in the village getting together. When someone is building a house, they would get together and cook the food and carry it up to the hills for the men who are walking in the grounds or on a house. So it was camaraderie. And the women of that day were strong. They were strong. They woke up all in the mornings, and they took care of the children, took care of the animals, took care of everything. And you wonder where they got all that energy from. But today we get tired very quickly. Those people had good food to eat. So I would say that back in that era, if you ask them today, they would say, I'm not complaining. We did what we had to do.
Thank you, Mrs. Reimer. Okay, if you're now tuning in, you're listening to the Money Matters BVI e-forum, Testimonies and Stories of Women's Economic Empowerment. If you wish to contribute to the discussion, please dial 340-7467 or 340-7419, or you may post your comment to our Facebook page, Money Matters BVI. Now we're going around the table to hear stories and really testimonies about the economic struggles faced by women so long ago, based on the stories that we've heard and based on what we've experienced. So I invite Mrs. Vanterpool, Mr. Faulkner, and Mr. Husbands to chime in.
Well, I can definitely relate to a lot of what Mrs. Reimer has said, because my grandfather also, when he migrated to St. Thomas, he worked in the Bourne Field Project. And when he was there, my grandmother had to do everything. So she took care of her two sons, she took care of the animals, and she would have to travel a long distance to take care of the animals. And she also took care of my grandfather's ground. And one of the stories they would tell me is that whenever my grandfather worked in St. Thomas, but he would send his clothes back to Tortola to be washed, folded, whatever, and sent back. But what he would do is he would put some money in his pocket. So when they got the laundry, my father and his brother would find this money and they'd be happy. And of course, he'd be sending the money home for my grandmother to take care of the family and all their needs. But it was, when you hear those stories and you hear it from them, it's like, what are we doing? We really soft, because taking care of animals, taking care of the ground, how do you do that? Washing on your hand? How do you do all that? And taking care of the children? Man, they were super women, totally super women. So yeah, I could relate to some of it, but I didn't live it, but I heard all the stories. As a matter of fact, I really enjoyed listening to my grandparents, especially my grandfather, talk about his life. He was a strong man himself, worked hard, but then back then, like Ms. Rema said, it was a community raising children. Everybody shared. If you fished, you shared your fish. If I had a grong, I shared my provisions with you. So everything was rounded and everyone ate, but it was hard. It was still hard. So, that's my little 2 cents.
I imagine because there was a lot of manual labor, and in terms of, you said your grandfather would send home his laundry with money in the pocket,
Pockets.
but women who are away often found their way back home to have their children as well.
Well, my parents, my father was very adamant about his children being born in Tortola because that's where he was from. And he was seen as maybe insane because at that time, everyone wanted to have their children in the U.S. Virgin Islands. He was just different.
Yes, insisting on that.
Yes,
And we're
he
going to
insisted.
come back to the conversation of that children being born abroad for opportunities when we come up to the future. Mr. Faulkner, go right ahead.
I guess I would echo the similar sentiments in terms of not being fortunate or to live in that era, but I've also heard the stories. And when I hear people talk about the time being difficult and it was hard, I think it's a bit relative, simply because I think at that time, as my good colleague mentioned, persons will tell you they did what they had to do. I've heard stories and living with my grandmother at certain point in time when the amount of things they did before going off to school, you wonder what happened during the day. I mean, you wanted breakfast, somebody had to go milk the cow. And I mean, the distance where the cow is another story to get back with the milk. And then the grounds and so forth, the farming and so on. But these women also found time to perform other, what I would consider now to be entrepreneurial skills in the sense of, straw, baking goods and so forth. And I think, Mrs. Vanterpool, you made a comment about the community, for lack of a better word, bartering with each other to make sure that everyone had what the other one needed. And I think that is something in terms of going beyond just a community raising children, but it's a community surviving on their own in light of the environment and at the time that they were actually functioning. So I think it's obviously relative to the time. I don't think anyone during that time would say it was difficult. They will say in today's time, you guys have it good. Because everything you want, you simply just say, all right, let me just go to the fridge or go to the grocery store, as opposed to literally going and get it yourself.
If I may, Madam Moderator.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yes. When we analyze the involvement of women in those days in economic activity, we can only marvel at their sense of industry, their level of ambition, and the output, because we didn't have the same rates of crime as we now have. Many of those children, although they may not have been as educated as a modern day person might be, they contributed significantly to society in one way or other. So I think we really must take the time to applaud those women for having that level of industry, that sense of entrepreneurship, and that level of ambition, not only for themselves, but for their families. And we've seen the product of those efforts even today. So they should be applauded. They opened their shops because transportation was limited, so one could not go into town to a supermarket in those days. So you saw the opening of a lot of village or corner shops. So we are now seeing the output of those efforts even today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Husbands?
Yeah, so I would agree. I mean, when I grew up in Barbados, but what was described, the culture was very much the same. And how women were. Sorry, I grew up in Barbados and not in the BVI, but the culture as described here was pretty much the same. How women actually attended to a lot of the chores. Women did a lot of the hard work as well. Women did a lot of the things that uh, may have been reserved for men, but women did, especially when men immigrated. And in the Barbados case, men immigrated to Guyana, which had lots of land and more opportunities and so on. So that's why so many Guyanese now have Barbadian family names and Barbadian cousins and so on. So it's the same thing. So it happened there. I suspect it happened throughout the Caribbean, and for all that, women still didn't have the full rights that men had. For example, they didn't have the full opportunities for education, full opportunities for employment, and things like that that men had. So therefore, there was still a legal disadvantage that women face. They face a disadvantage in property. And when we get later on to the intestate, to succession, inheritance of property, we will see how the Intestate Estates Act, which is still on the BVI law books, didn't favor the wife, the widow, after the death of her husband in inheritance of property, even up to today.
Okay, thank you. So moving forward a bit, after the 1950s, into the 60s, going up to the 90s, we saw tourism come into the BVI, and we saw quite a few women getting jobs in housekeeping and in office jobs and so forth. In the late 60s, early 70s, we saw a commercial school in the eastern end of Tortola, Dixon Commercial School, I think it was called, where persons were able to learn typewriting and English and shorthand and so forth. And many women took advantage of the opportunities. And I'm told of stories where it was said that all the persons from the eastern end were getting all the jobs because they held quite high positions. And one woman was complaining, and she was told, well, what you might need to do is find a man from the eastern end. So as we see that evolution and progress in opportunities for women, would anyone like to chime in at this point? Okay, I will pull a historian here in as I raise another issue that we were seeing around that time, where to be pregnant and unwed meant that you would be expelled from the government service. And of course, for women who got jobs in teaching and nursing, that was a big thing. You had a secure job, but then to become pregnant, that would really throw all your opportunities out the window. And I'm told that was a permanent decision toward you, Mrs. Reimer.
Well, when I was in secondary school, I know of young women who got pregnant and they had to leave school also. You just missed them. They never came back the next semester. And the talk was that they had gotten pregnant. I know of women who got into the government service who got pregnant and they had to go home to fend for themselves. I think this was so inhumane. Come on, one person can't get himself pregnant. It got to be two persons together. So the woman is suffering. She is bearing the brunt of the situation, and the man is in school. Because many times the boy was still in school, but the woman, the young girl, was at home, not getting her education. And then in the government service, she was at home, but the boy was still working. I'm glad that that has changed because really, that is not fair for us women. Come on. It wasn't fair at all. But I know when I was working at the ports, there was a young lady who was telling me that when she got pregnant, you know, they were threatening to get rid of her too, but somebody spoke up for her and she remained. But that was a situation for real. It was a immoral thing to get pregnant and you're not married. You know, I mean, we have come a long way, thanks to God.
Yeah, I should say as well, if I could cut in here, that system persisted long into the 20th century. That system persisted in the 70s and I believe in the 80s as well. And it was still being practiced in a number of the other islands. I know in St. Lucia, a case was fought over it. I think it was in the 80s or the early 90s. So it continued for a long time, continued very long.
Dr. Samuels, would you like to come in on that point?
Yes, I agree that the approach then was inhuman and degrading. But then you have to appreciate that in those days, they had and embraced a set of values. And to transgress those values showed that somebody failed somewhere along the line. And that was one way of kind of preserving the values that the communities embraced. So yes, I agree that it was unfortunate, and we have come a long way in that we have the adoption of UN charters, with the enhancement of our constitutional framework, and so on. Those approaches have changed, but we have to appreciate it in light of the values that were embraced even in that time. Remember that the church's philosophies were very dominant in that era. And so let's look at it from that perspective.
Okay. Okay, I imagine in addition to the church's perspective, political perspectives drove a lot of what was happening. And I'm told in the 1960s, we saw our first female run for politics in the BVI. But it wasn't until in the 1990s that we got our first representatives who were women, those being Mrs. Eileen Parsons, who will chime in at some point soon, and at large, and Miss Etlyn Smith. And we also saw a female attorney general in the person of Stancia Penn, QC, and she championed the cause for children out of wedlock to get rights. And while she was the attorney general, we saw BVI eventually really institute what other jurisdictions had done in the name of the Status of Children's Act. So I will ask Mr. Husbands and Dr. Samuels to come in at this point.
Benedict, okay.
Yes.
Go ahead, Benedicta.
I do recall when the Status of Children's Act was being debated initially. And it is amazing to find that although we just spoke about those values that were embraced, those values of morality, we find that a lot of people resisted the proposal or the proposition that children born in unwed relationships should not be treated in the same manner as those born within wedlock. And so you would find that although the bill was drafted many years ago, it's only in 2004 that act was actually enacted. simply again because of the theoretical, the theological, the cultural norms that we embraced even in that time. I can recall one very prominent lady saying that she did not want bastards to be treated in the same way as her children are treated. And that sentiment disturbed me. But the children were not responsible for being here, and so they should be treated, there should be no discrimination, which is what even the various conventions, the various human rights conventions and so on, were trying to overcome. There should be no bias, there should be no discrimination, everybody should be treated equally. And that is what the Status of Children's Act has now been able to achieve. Now, when we compare the Status of Children's Act with the framework of the Intestate Estates Act, which is what my learned friend, Mr. Husband, referred to a moment ago, we find that that act is yet to be updated to match the purport and intent of the Status of Children's Act. You wouldn't believe that the act as it is does not even recognize grandchildren now. A brother or somebody else that's more remote from the familial bloodline will take priority even over one's own grandchild. And so we realize that there are lacunae or gaps in the law where children must be, especially their inheritance rights, must be upheld and protected.
Yes, if I can say, I remember, to follow on from this, Dr. Samuel, that he was a very courageous member from Virgin Gorda, Mr. Ray George, who moved the private members bill. That is not a bill that was proposed by the government, but he as a member proposed the bill. That was the first discussion, the first bill to abolish the status of illegitimacy, and so that all children will be on the same footing. And the bill was debated and it was defeated. And then later on it was brought back by the government and it was enacted. But Mr. Ray George was the first person who brought the bill to the House.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to chime in here? Mrs. Reimer? No? Mr. Faulkner? Mrs. Vanterpool-Vanelli? Okay, do we have Ms. Parsons on the line? So I mentioned a minute ago that Mrs. Parsons was one of the first female legislators in the BVI. And a question to Ms. Parsons is, how did she feel, or did she feel that she had an impact in terms of being a motivational factor for women who saw her aspire and attain political office and become an agent for change? Go ahead, Mrs. Parsons. Ms. Parsons?
Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
You are hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I'm asking to make a comment on the bill to regularize children born out of wedlock. I was in council at that time, and I remember several women. My phone used to be my home phone, which was in the telephone directory, used to be jumping off the hook with women telling me, Miss P, do not touch that thing. These were women whose husband either had children before marriage or got children during the period of the marriage. and they did not want, they felt that these children should not be rated the same as theirs. Mr. Real George was also in council at the time, and he was flooded with calls about not touching, as they call it, that thing. It is wrong. There's no way that them children could qualify with mine. Well, for me, during my time in council, I really concentrated on education. I put a lot of kids through HLSCC. I would give them $25,000 every January to be used as scholarships. And because I told the children in one speech I did at a graduation, if your parents can send you away, I have no problem with it. But if you're coming to me for taxpayers' money, I am expecting 2 years at Arakita Bay, at least one at Arakita Bay. And I am pleased to say we have turned out lawyers, doctors, all kind of financiers, and so forth from that institution. And I am extremely proud of my relationship with HLSCC. 2019 was 30 years I had given up my life. 30 years from 1989 to 2019. So we've been with HLSCC. My term finished, I must say, unceremoniously in 2019. But that's another story. For me, getting in council as the first female at large, and the other lady was in the district, it showed women that they could do it also. This was my reason for trying in 83, 86, 90. And I never lost by more than 12 votes. And I was trying to, many people told me, Miss P, keep out of that muck. Why you want to go in that far? And I had a group of young men who were my support system. Finally, 2 women came aboard. But it was young men who walked the hills and valleys of this country with me, supporting my bid to open the door, to break down the walls of this Jericho that was a man only. And would you believe in 1950, November, when they had the voting, women were not allowed to vote. It was the second time around that women were given the vote. But at first, we were not allowed. It was afterward that we were given the right to vote. And for my time in council, I honestly consider my time spent getting education for children, I honestly consider a plus the racetrack that was the best for-furlong track in the Caribbean. I consider the murals at Hawaii Hill, which is an outdoor educational museum, the only tourist attraction in the country so far. And of course, I was able to, where I was Minister of Land, I was able to help people who I never thought had any contact with Totola. I was able to help them get their grandmother land, just Van Dyke and the Garda, Sikau Bay, and that sort of thing. And I truly enjoy, maybe I am a political animal, but I truly enjoy my time in council from 95 to 2007 when I lost my leg, my first leg, and I decided to do what Kenny Rogers sang about, know when to walk away, and I decided not to contest elections again. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Parsons. Okay, we have a comment online by Dr. Patricia Turnbull, who was speaking about the discussion earlier in relation to the Status of Children's Act. She was saying that those were the church's values, and the church was a patriarchal institution that dominated the system, especially education. And women's status and children's status were not then viewed as significant. To add to that, I would say that it is my understanding that the Christian Council actually helped to champion that act. I would stand corrected if someone could give some more information on that. So before we leave this quarter of the discussion, we know even going through the high school system, there was always a lot of talk about brain drain. And we saw in the 90s and 80s, the college came on board in the early 1990s. We saw women getting access to education. And so those women were going abroad. Some of them chose to stay away and take advantage of the economic prospects over on that side, wherever that was, after studying. Conversely, we see what could be viewed as a limitation being placed on some roles of women due to bond requirements, because some persons were not able to work in their field. It was business administration, whether you studied it or not. Can anyone comment on these issues, please?
If I may, Madam Moderator,
Yes.
without making reference to specific persons, we are aware that some of our brightest attended the University of the West Indies in those
Yes.
earlier times. And to my knowledge, most of them returned home and made their contribution in a very significant way. Again, before calling names, they have risen to the highest of ranks at both the economic and political stratas within our society. Yes, we agree that many of them did not return home, but the question must be asked, why? Was it just for economic reasons, or was it more for career and educational advancement? I think those were the two major purposes or reasons why many may have stayed, may not have returned to make their contribution as they may have liked. Some got married, even within my own family. Some thought that returning to the BVI may have been more of a regression for them, because by that time they would have been exposed to so many more innovative and technological advancements than they would find returning to the BVI. So again, we have to look at everything within the context of the times. It isn't that many people don't love their country, but it's just that other circumstances prevented them from making the decision to return home at that particular time. Of course, many of them have now retired and they have returned home, and they're still making their contribution. I call it trying to catch up, compensate for the time that they may have lost. And we thank them for at least coming back home and making their contribution to society in various and diverse ways. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to say to the listening public that this is the Money Matters BVI e-forum, testimonies and stories of women's economic empowerment. Our phone lines are open. You may ring us to make a comment, 340-7419, or you may post a comment on our Facebook page. Do we have a caller? Okay, go right ahead.
Hello?
Yes, go right ahead.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Am I on? The comment I would like to make is that something that we have not taken into consideration, maybe even now, with giving scholarships, with giving scholarships, as, uh, as while a lot of the women return home so that their own grandmother or their mother could be their midwife. A lot of children were born in the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, even states. And when we give scholarships, we never took into account then that out of every 10 of us, 8 either have a green card or were born in one of the United States places. So when they went away, the grass on the other side was much greener and it was more profit. I remember I worked at the college in St. Thomas and the government then sent down 8 young ladies to the nursing program, which was the best nursing program then in the Caribbean. And those 8 young ladies did very well. And all of them who were not born in one of the U.S. Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico had a green card. Not one returned home. A few accepted jobs at a hospital in St. Thomas. Others accepted jobs abroad. They had family in the States. They went up. And nurses are always in demand. Not one returned home. Maybe that is something we should do in bonding. If you want to go away to study on government money and you were born away from here, make you sign a bond to give us a 3 or 4 years before you migrate somewhere else. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we're in our third quarter now and of our discussion, and women are now better educated with lots of avenues for career advancement have been opening. And so in my discussion with Mr. Otto O'Neill, he mentioned the fact that the public sector is now dominated by women, especially at the clerical and executive levels. So, Mr. Faulkner, let me put you on the spot. Would you say that there's a relationship between women's economic empowerment and the ability to accomplish better financial goals?
I would absolutely agree. I would even challenge Mr. Otto O'Neill that it's not only at the clerical level, it's at all levels. Um, I mean, I run an office right now and it's 15 of us and it's 13 women. And all my life I've worked in the Virgin Islands. It's always been dominated by women. Now I do know that most men appear to be a bit more industrial in terms of the type of work that they seek. But I would have to say right now that I totally agree that the landscape of the BVI in terms of the economic drivers, when you look at the key elements in the territory, it's dominated by women.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Husbands?
Yes, I would agree with that. If you look at even in the law firms and the trust companies, and you look in all those professions, you see they're dominated by women. Women are the ones who are making strides in those sectors, whereas men do other things, as Mr. Faulkner said, more industrial type things. But the civil service, the Financial Services Commission, all the other agencies, you see that there are the preponderance of women, a majority of women. And you then begin to wonder, well, how if the society wasn't held back years ago because this talent wasn't really use in taking the society forward as it is now. But I would agree.
Yes. Okay, thank you. And the women on the panel, I will put two questions to you, Mrs. Reimer, Mrs. Vanterpool Bonelli, and Dr. Samuels. Are women recognizing the economic opportunities that exist? Question one. And question two, are women really fearful of taking advantage of those economic opportunities when they recognize them?
I can hazard an answer, if I may.
Yes, go right ahead.
Right. I think in order to intelligently respond to that inquiry, we need to understand what economic empowerment is, or how do we articulate it. And to my mind, it's the opportunity or the capacity of a woman or man to take advantage or to make a contribution to politics, to economics, to all of the sectors, just for the advancement of the society. So as to whether they are recognizing those opportunities, that is something that can be answered only by an individual. An individual must ask himself or herself, and in this case, in the context of women, that woman should ask herself, what do I want to do? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What are my limitations? And what are my fears? We know that history records that women have taken the world by storm, especially since the 1940s. We don't have to look very far, even within our own milieu, our own society. We see that women have risen to the top. They have distinguished themselves. How did they do that? That was done because we realized that economic empowerment must be tethered or coupled or affiliated or associated with other types of empowerment. Psychological empowerment is very critical. Spiritual empowerment is vital. Economic empowerment is vital, yes. There are different types of empowerment that women must recognize are there or that exist in order for them to be economically empowered. There's social empowerment. There are different types of empowerment. So an individual must ask herself, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What do I want to do? And where do I start on that journey to achieving what I want to do? I think that's very important. I know that some women might be impeded by various barriers. Let's say fear is one of them. Many of us don't have the courage to take risks. And I always look at, let's say, most of our banks in the territory are run by women, are managed by women. We have women who occupy the highest, except for the premiership. We have had women who have been deputy premiers, deputy governors, deputy attorneys general. Women have the capacity to rise to the highest level. It therefore goes back to the individual's capacity to appreciate his or her own, her own limitations, her own values, her own aspirations, and go from there. That would be my contribution to that inquiry.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Samuels.
If I could also add, I should have mentioned that one of the big drivers, I suppose, in the empowerment of women has been the ability to reduce and limit the size of their families. And I think that really frees up women to go out there into the public or private sector and perform because of that single power that women have that their grandparents, their grandmothers never had.
Thank you. And Dr. Samuels, you mentioned a lot of interesting points, and I'm going to come back to you after Mrs. Vanderpool Bonelli and Mrs. Reimer to ask you, so hold your point, as to how you feel empowerment of women can begin in the home. So before I open the mics for Mrs. Reimer and Mrs. Vanderpool Bonelli, I mentioned note that Mr. Otto O'Neill and I had a conversation where I drew from that conversation that women were dominating the public sector, especially at the clerical and executive levels. I didn't say who Mr. Otto O'Neill is. He's a former head of development planning unit of the government. He's one of the first and leading economists and political scientists in the BVI, and was so for a number of years. And he was also cabinet secretary. Now, in response to the comment I made from our conversation, we have a comment by Dr. Patricia Turnbull on Facebook, which says that these places are dominated, these positions are dominated by women quantitatively, but run and headed by men. So anyone may comment on this. However, the question still stands for Mrs. Reimer and Mrs. Vanderpool Bonelli. Are women recognizing economic opportunities, and are they fearful of taking advantage of these recognized economic opportunities?
From where I sit, I've had the opportunity to speak to many of these young women. They're earning a lot more. However, they're not very financially literate, but they're trying to become financially literate. I think they lack self-confidence as far as going out there and investing this money to even, grow it further. But all they need is access to information. And my friend over here, I've been having several discussions with him regarding how can these women become more confident in investing? What resources do we have available? So I reached out to him, it was last week or this week, I think it was last week, to ask him specifically, what does PMI offer in regards to women? Because women are earning more, they just need a little guidance in what to do with that money. I also did a little International Women's Day program on Zanta's behalf, and the host, the GIS host, she was very happy with the information. She was not aware that, you don't need a lot of money to invest. You can invest $500, you can invest $50. You just have to have the right avenue to do so. Although maybe PMI may not be able to assist with $50, I suggested some other options like Banco Popular. Some of the banks have an investment arm. It may not be on island. However, for Banco Popular, it's Puerto Rico. You can invest even $50. A lot of people don't know that. Investing is growing your money, growing. And I think people just aren't aware. Women aren't aware. We're not aware. So it's up to us that are aware to teach those that are not aware. And that's what I think we need to do. And I really applaud Money Matters for what they're doing. At least you're creating that awareness. Keep at it. It's not reaching every strata, but if you keep it up, I think it will. And of course, the rest of us, we can, like Zanta, all the women's organizations, we can continue to do what we do in support of the effort of empowering women financially, helping them to become more financially literate. And hey, the future is bright.
Thank you, Mrs. Vanderpool Bonelli. Mrs. Reimer?
Yes. I would say that many women are stepping out on faith to invest, and they're doing great things. Not everyone is afraid. Some are really stepping out there and doing the things that they ought to do. I'm thinking about the time when Mrs. Eileen Parsons and Honorable Ethel Smith, it wasn't popular to enter the political arena, but they did. And I think that they have empowered women today to do the same. Look at our legislative council. Look at the women there. I mean, she has done a great job, she and Honorable Ethel Smith, to empower women to do the same. And women are also doing jobs that men were only doing. So I think, yes, women have come a long way. They're in professions that were only labeled for men, like architects, engineers, electricians, contractors. So I want to big up my women, because they're really doing a great job. And, when I was at Ports Authority working, a simple thing as saving $200 a month goes a long way. They had this where you could put your money in two banks, right? And you put your money in one bank where you really don't go often, and over time the money adds up. So it's the little things like Mrs. Vanderpool said that works. You don't have to be a millionaire to invest. Just a little bit you have goes a very long way. So women, I want to big you up. You are doing a fantastic job. You're entering the political arena, and you're also doing the jobs that were labeled for only men.
Thank you. Direct deposit is something that we often tell our audiences to take advantage of. Your workplace sometimes will send your money to 3, 4, 5 financial institutions on your behalf. Take advantage of it so you don't spend it all once it enters one bank account. Is this good advice, Mr. Faulkner?
There's a couple of things that were highlighted by my colleagues that I'd like to touch a little bit on. A couple of years ago, we did an analysis in terms of the banks in the territory. One of the things we found out with the local indigenous bank was that the majority of the depositors were women and children. And what we recognized is that there was an embedded level of discipline that women had, that they decided we needed to put something aside for the rainy day. Now, that is one part of it in terms of women basically assuming the role of ensuring that families are protected, one side. Now, when we fast forward a little bit to the other element in terms of economic empowerment, and I like the term that Dr. Samuels made mention of, in the sense of social empowerment as well. I fully embrace the notion that women need information, and not just women. I would say everyone needs information as it relates to their financial wherewithal. But one of the things that I must say, and let me preface by saying I don't want to bring a negative tone to this, but the social element of social empowerment has two distinct features. One, those individuals who receive the opportunity to advance and do so by encouraging others and bring them along to say, you don't have to walk the tough road that I have walked. Let me help you to the next level. The challenge with that is you also get the other side of the coin, where there are those who now believe they have arrived and no one else should come up to where they are. And I think that is the difficult point, where instead of helping a sister or a brother along, we simply say, no, it's not your time yet. And I think that is one of the challenges that I would like to see in the future, that is eliminated from the perspective that we're all in this together. And the only way we're going to really see the true potential is for us to say, if I have made it, how can I bring the next person along?
Thank you. And I know I experienced that type of thing personally when I switched career very late and moved into law. My colleagues made it very clear to me that I would have to pay my dues, that they were going to make it very difficult for me. And so we see this type of thing happening, but you just roll with the punches, right? So Dr. Samuels, we're back to you. Empowerment from the home. Does this make a difference?
I subscribe to the notion that women have the most power in the home, in most homes. Women have been bakers, they have been cooks, they have been seamstresses, they have been engaging in entrepreneurial activity even within the home. And although most men, I'm sorry for Mr. Husbands and Mr. Faulkner, no offense meant, but you would acknowledge that women run things. I'll get the response later. But basically in a home, it's what the woman says, is what the mother says that everyone has to fall into alignment with. The women seem to have some mystical power over their families. They understand the importance of putting aside something for a rainy day, no matter how small it might be. And where they might not be able to put aside much, they see to it that their children are encouraged. They imbue some kind of ambition into their children for them to excel later on in life. So yes, women have that power within the home to influence their children, to promote commercial activity, and to encourage their children to conserve, to be conservative. I know of one mother who told her child, and it's not me, you're not going to buy another pair of shoes for the year. That was a woman who saw to it that her daughter was not overcome by consumerism, but instilled in the daughter the importance of saving whatever little she could for her future endeavors. So I subscribe to the notion that mothers or women do have the power to help their children take the right path in life.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels. Before we move into exploring the issue or the question of whether women are the biggest culprits when it comes to keeping up with the Joneses or trying to keep up with the Joneses, I won't pass up the opportunity for Mr. Faulkner and Mr. Husbands to explain this mystical power that women have in the home.
My dear brother husbands, International Women's Day, I agree.
Yes, I do agree. Having been raised by a mother, my mother died, the mystical thing, my mother died in 2000. And a week doesn't pass without me feeling some connection to her. My father and I, we were close as well, but there's something that was just a little different. So women do have, in the home, that power. My father was the wage earner. My mother was a housewife, but still, there is, yeah, I agree, there is this mystical power.
We made sure we didn't go too close to home, right? But okay, so yes, we know women they could be quite diligent, but I'm not sure that women delay gratification as much as they could. They see maybe a new kitchen in someone's house and they want it. They see a new car, they would like an upgrade. They see someone in new treads and they would like that, and they don't want their children to look any worse than anyone else's children. So are they really the biggest culprits when it comes to keeping up with the Joneses? Although just like the grandmothers, they do stash away a little money now and again that they can pull in case something happens. Floor is open.
I think men are big consumers. Men are big consumers. The ad, if you watch the ads on TV, they're promoted to men just as much they're promoted to women. Men may buy other things. They may buy tools. They may buy power stuff, or they may buy other things. But they may not buy shoes, but they may buy, So men are big consumers as well. I would think just as big as women. I think it's 50-50.
I agree. I agree with the fact that we women sadly are culprits of this. We compare ourselves to each other so much. And as a result, we are powerless to change or to achieve our goals because we are watching what the other person has and we go out and get it too. And rather than embracing each other's success, what we do is we turn on each other. We participate in outdressing each other on the job, even on the job. Rather than networking with each other, we are isolated from each other. And so we are not helping each other as much as we should. So yes, I would agree with the fact that a lot of us women are guilty of keeping up with the Joneses, even though we can't afford it. And then when you see the bill come in, you wonder how you're going to get it paid. And then you got to go and borrow it from someone. So I would like us women to stop that. Just put your hat where you could reach it, not too high up, because it's going to put you in trouble. You're going to go backwards financially.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I know someone was giving me a story about one lady who had borrowed money from friends in order to send a child to college. Child went away, and of course, the first time away from home, and they were having a jolly good time. Degree was not complete, money was due. And the lady was wondering, well, how were they going to deal with that issue? So we'll continue that discussion. We have a caller, Ms. Rose Smith.
Good evening to all the ladies.
Good evening.
This is our day we are celebrating. But as a little girl, I always tried to put my foot inside my mother's shoes to see what it was like to be the lady walking in those shoes, because she used to say, you do it because I told you so. My mother fished for a living, the entire family fished for a living. My father's family were mason, and they did agriculture work. They also were farmers. As children, they taught us what it was like to serve others. I see that when the boat would come to town, they would give all the fish to the mothers that had little children, because they always look out for the little children. And they empowered each other by working together as one. And today we see that kind of relationship like it has disappeared. And something else is me and I and not us. And we need to take us, because as women, we were taught everything how to sew. We had booths in the festival village. We also had a shop. So we learned how, because those values were instilled in us as children. Being in the home with the father too, my father taught us how, he took us up to the mountain to show us how the trees were tied to make the bow of the boat when Elvi Hadj was building his boat. So we were exposed to a lot of things. So all those things have enriched our lives as children. So in today's world, we find it's not always the folks that is in those high top jobs, but they also the fishermen. It's the waitresses. It's all those women in those fields, those the clean. It's all those we empowering at this time. It said, look, they open their own business. Some of them have their own food van. So we also look at those folks.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Thank you very much. Anyone else would like to comment here?
If I may piggyback on the caller's comments, I think the good lady touched on something very important, and something that I don't see happening is the values and customs that have helped mold us to who we are as a people is somehow not good enough or a bit mediocre for us to pass on to our kids. Um, whilst I understand the dynamics of life have changed, there is something deep rooted in the fundamental values that have created us as a people, as a nation. And I think that is something that we from time to time seem to overlook. Where I know in the early days, discipline was a major factor, but you see now they come up for us. Everything is what you call abuse now. And I think and it's not about just the matter of discipline in the form of corporal punishment, but from the point of view of some of the basic fundamentals of what you do in terms of sustaining life, empowerment, and so forth. I think those norms, as much as you may have not liked certain parts of it, in some cases I've seen us completely gone away from it in terms of, advancing societies, and note the term I use, advancing societies. And I think Dr. Samuels made the point about individuals. It's going to come down to an individual's perspective on where and when all of us want to make that worthy contribution towards building better societies.
Thank you, Mr. Faulkner. For our listeners, again, this is the Money Matters BVI Forum, Testimonies and Stories of Women's Economic Empowerment, today being International Women's Day. You may call and contribute 340-7419, or you may post your comment on our Facebook page. We are taking note of them. Now, another area of our discussion here, we saw in 2017 a major hurricane hit us, and then we saw in 2020 COVID-19 pandemic. And women, we always saw in the news where there were some persons with bachelor's and master's degree working at Home Depot in the States. But now here in the BVI, we're also seeing some women who were laid off working jobs that are paying less. And so they attained a certain level, and then they basically had to go back with incomes being stagnated or becoming less benefits, less opportunities for upward mobility. Can anyone comment on this and how women can be empowered even in this type circumstance? The husbands?
Yes, I would imagine, I haven't done a poll, but I would imagine that women would normally bear a disproportionate amount of the pressure from that type of dislocation. Because even in the corporate environment or environments where women have been making an advancement, their voice is still doesn't have the power of a male voice. They're not taken as seriously. And they are still marginalized to some extent in when they get to speak. And people treat a male voice differently. And that happens with access to resources like employment and so on. They still have an advantage. So I think that with all the advancement women have made, there's still a double standard that still exists where women have been the subject of that. So there's no reason, there's no surprise that this has happened. I mean, it's probably global as well. It's probably global as well, where women have gone back. Some women, highly qualified women, have had to take jobs way below. I mean, it happened to men too, but would imagine it's a disproportionate amount of women. I don't know if it's a fault. No, I agree. I don't.
I know what I would agree. I think it is twofold. It is the economic landscape in terms of the ability to provide the opportunity for individuals, women, and then there's also the balance of during difficult times, most women, especially those that are mothers, will definitely want some flexibility to make sure that their families, children are taken care of. And they in some cases will be the first to put up their hand and say, I'd like to have the flexibility to either work remotely or cut back my hours or days to be able to take care of the family. But I think from the perspective of national importance, the contribution or the opportunities are still afforded to them to make that contribution. But I think in today's world, what you're seeing is they want to also make sure they have some flexibility and balance as it relates to taking care of the family as well. Now, I must say, for the first time in my life over the last 10 years, I have seen firsthand in my line of work where the term house husband has become more prevalent than in prior years. I have seen firsthand where a lady who is eminently qualified agreed to take a job that can probably compensate for both her and her husband previous job, and he decided I have no problems being a house husband. So I think even that topic you're beginning to see a lot more of, because I think it comes down again to Dr. Samuel's point. What does the individual see as best for the family, and can the union decide which is the best route for us to take? And if the good lady is the right person to take the lead, by all means let her take the lead.
Okay, thank you. Now that's a good segue into this question about women and whether they should feel ashamed when they take on a lesser role in the home, a reduced role in the workplace, or even take on secondary tasks. I remember I attended a Rotary dinner at Long Bay over 10 years ago, and I saw an employee of the bank, and she was quite senior, and she was moonlighting, as we call it, and she was waitressing. I've seen a number of times at Right Way, we see persons who work in senior positions who are cashing in the evening because they've set a goal and they wish to earn some additional money. And then out of sight, we see persons going over to our sister islands and working jobs in the evenings. Should women feel ashamed of doing this type thing? Go ahead, Mrs. Ryan.
No, I don't think so. Once it's honorable work, they shouldn't feel ashamed, because they have set a goal. Maybe they want to pay off the mortgage sooner. Maybe they want to send their children to college. So I don't think that they should feel ashamed because, things happen in our lives that we have to do certain things that we never dreamed we had to do. So women, if you are doing that out there and you're having an extra job besides your job, just do it because nobody knows what your goal is. And if it's honorable, just go ahead.
Although I must say that it's probably true that there are a higher proportion of women who would be called upon to make that to take that option than a higher proportion of men would. So it is still probably a female phenomenon more than it is a male phenomenon, probably.
Thank you.
The reality
May I
is
comment?
the reality is self-confidence. My dad gave me two $1 bills in my early years, and he says, one is from a lawyer, one is from a garbage man. Pick the one that you think is from the garbage man. You can't tell. And his message was, once you're earning an honest dollar, do the best job you can. So that individual who has taken the time to realize that their financial situation requires an increase in income coming into the family, And if she or he, or in this case, she decides, I am going to waitress because I'm going to get some tips and I'm going to get some additional income, more power to her. And I think that is where you see the true strength in a woman, because she knows why she is doing that for the betterment of her family and herself.
Yes, may I comment?
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Samuels.
Right. There are many angles from which this whole notion of moonlighting, or whatever you want to call it, might arise. And of course, many women undertake various jobs for various reasons. I'll give you an example, or perhaps I could just say that some women find joy in doing something other than her regular profession or her regular occupation. That is because she wants the exposure. She wants to know more about other things than to be confined or limited to what she does or what she was trained to do. So some people do that for extra exposure. But going back to the whole issue of having to work more than one job, or even losing what your earnings that you once earned, I find it is having a great toll on women, not only the wear and tear on their physical selves, but coming out of that, we find mental health issues, depression, for instance, and even domestic abuse, because many of them find themselves in an environment where they are earning more than the male cohabitee or the male partner, and some men find that it's very difficult for them to cope with. So there again, it goes back to one's individual circumstances and what exactly informs that person's desire to either want to do work outside the home or settle or accept income less than what one previously earned. Yes, goals are to be made or attained, but what are the other consequences? Are your children neglected as a result of your working 3 and 4 jobs? So yes, you might make more money, but at the end of the day, what are the other outcomes, especially where the children are concerned? Many women take care of their elderly parents. Are they neglected? So those are points that we have to look at, in fact, looking at it from a holistic standpoint as to why exactly women moonlight, and or why some of them settle for low-paying jobs. In some instances, it's an involuntary process. They are either their hours are cut from their regular jobs, or there are other reasons. But there again, that's why we are talking about social empowerment now. Where are our institutions to assist people who find themselves in an undesirable situation where they have to find 3 or 4 jobs, especially where their children or other persons are neglected as a result of working 3 or 4 jobs? There must be some social impact and physical health, mental health, other domestic outcomes when we talk about engaging in these types of activities.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels.
I certainly see no shame in someone taking on, an additional job to make ends meet. I mean, you've spoken about a hurricane, you've spoken about COVID. I mean, I speak to people every day. I assist people every day. The people who come into the pharmacy, they can't afford medication because of those circumstances. Some of them can find work, some of them can't find, work that pays them enough. But I see nothing shameful in it. And I think as a society, as a community, we need to stop doing that. We need to stop making people feel ashamed because, they have hit hard times. I think, I think we need to come back to being a village, a nurturing village, because I think a lot of what people feel is because of how they think other people are going to see them or what other people think. They know their circumstances. It comes down to the individual, like Dr. Samuel said, and like Mr. Faulkner said, it comes down to that particular individual. If you know you have financial goals, you have to find ways to meet those financial goals. If you know, you have several bills, you have, listen, there's so many circumstances out there that I hear about every day that I know people are really hurting. More people are hurting mentally because they're not able to find jobs. They're not able to meet their monthly bills. They haven't been able to do so for months. Even when it comes to their homes, people are going through serious mental trauma simply because of that. And I know it because I speak to some of them. It's not shameful. You're earning an honest dollar, it's not shameful. I don't see it as shameful. And I think we need to stop making people feel ashamed for doing that.
Yes, thank you. So peer perspective or social perspectives definitely impact or serve as barriers to women's economic empowerment. So we're entering our last few minutes. We have two comments online, one from Dr. Turnbull and one from Mrs. Annie Malone-Fred. Dr. Turnbull says, what have we learned or what are we learning from our economic history and culture? Have we become so consumer and corporate that we have thrown the baby out with the bathwater? Traditionally, women have been the financial managers in their families and communities. Grassroots mechanisms like the SUSU and Partner Box thrive for women's enterprising spirit. Friendly or benevolent societies and rotating savings clubs and credit unions have evidently died, and trust in economic terms has new corporate meaning. How can we innovatively rebuild economic empowerment and inclusion based on these traditions? Mrs. Malone-Fred says the realities are that women are disadvantaged, most times due to systemic challenges inclusive of this territory's policies and legislation, which suffer from gender bias. So I'd like to go around the table and have final comments on what are some viable takeaways from the past that can help women to transform, positively transform their economic circumstances as they go forward. Let's begin with Mrs. Vanderpool Bonelli. I'll give each person 1 minute. 1 minute. We're given advice. In the future, what can women do in order to positively transform their own economic circumstances and that of their families?
Okay, well, someone said, I think it's Dr. Turnbull, that women used to be the money managers. I totally agree with that. I know my grandfather used to work, he used to give my grandmother the money and she stretched it, So I think we need to go back to just being responsible, just being a family unit, being responsible and saving, not going into debt unless you absolutely have to. So those are the core values that, they believed in. You work hard, you save your money, take care of your family. You don't go into any unnecessary debt. We need to get back to that. And I'll let someone else comment.
I'd like to say, let us take advantage of all the opportunities open to us as women. Let us not carry the shame of those who want to put it on us because we are trying to succeed, because let's keep on the path to success, because it's not only about us, it's about us empowering other women to succeed as well. Let us learn to celebrate each other. And I think that's a big factor because we don't do it enough. We tear down each other. So let's go forward and celebrate the success of other women. Because when you do that, you are also empowering yourself.
Thank you. Let's have the other lady give your final comments. Dr. Samuels?
Thank you. It's almost impossible in 1 minute to offer suggestions on how a woman can empower herself based on her history or the history of her society. I go back again to my central theme of being individualistic, knowing what you want out of your life. You must recognize your own self-worth and develop the confidence that you can do what you want to do despite the barriers, the hindrances, and the obstacles. I also encourage women to educate themselves to the extent that they can. Ignorance attracts a very high, goes at a very high cost. And so I encourage women to educate themselves, not only in one field of endeavor, but to the extent that they can, in as many areas as they can. Surround yourself with winners. It doesn't help you to have other people as your friends who are not helping you. So you have to choose your friends, choose your values, and choose what you want to do with life. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels. Mr. Husbands?
Yes, I would think that women should stand their ground, seek education and training where possible, and not cower or accept in the face of, in the face of male, male, what's the word, male empowerment, of feeling by males that they are somehow superior, you are somehow inferior, either in relationships or in the workplace. Women should stand their ground and hold their own.
My takeaway is twofold, individually and nationally. I firmly believe that in learning from our past, we need to be able to process data. What are we doing? Are we creating an environment where we can follow those coming, those who have passed, that can encourage the others to actually follow suit and do better? And I say this from not only an educational point of view, but also from a social perspective. Go back to the comment I made earlier in terms of what worked in the past in light of the environment at that time. Why is it not good enough anymore? So maybe some sort of a post-mortem need to be done there. But from an individual point of view, the ladders have been created for all women to have access and availability to strive for the stars, to do as well as they would want to do. My only concern is be humble with it. Humble from the perspective that you bring your sisters along. There is no need to stifle your sister. Seek the opportunities that are there for you, embrace them, but also embrace the others around you that you can say to the other person, let us take this to the next level. And I think from there, everything will sort itself out. Thank you.
Thank you, and we are out of time, just about. Thank you very much to our panelists, Dr. Benedicta Samuels, Mr. Jack Husbands, Mrs. Nona Vanterpool Benelli, Mrs. Etlin Reimer, and Mr. Clarence Faulkner, along with our resource persons who called in and all those who commented online, for participating in this important discussion. I know that our audience, both men and women, now have a lot to think about as relates to economic advancement. Our takeaways: honorable work is good work. Surround yourself with winners. Take advantage of opportunities. Stand your ground. Seek educational opportunities. Don't be intimidated by men. Ladders have no gender, and uplift others when you can. Thank you also to Mr. August, along with our technical team, Mr. Forbes and Mr. Smith, and Video and Audio Productions. Also, this e-forum would not be possible without the support and backing of the BVI Financial Services Commission. On behalf of the Money Matters BVI team, thank you again for joining us, and good night.